Netflix was once hailed as a global icon, the company that single-handedly changed the way the world watches movies and TV. From its humble beginnings as a DVD by mail service in California, it rose to dominate hundreds of millions of screens across the planet. But behind the glamour of red carpet premieres and award-winning shows lies a far more complicated story, one of high-risk decisions, explosive scandals and crises that nearly brought the streaming giant to its knees. While audiences were busy binge-watching original hits, Netflix was fighting battles off-screen, facing accusations of exploiting controversial content, bowing to political pressure, and rolling out policy changes that enraged loyal subscribers. These incidents didn't just spark outrage on social media, they rattled investors, sent stock prices plunging, and left the future of the once untouchable giant hanging in the balance. This isn't just the story of a tech company that streams films. It's the story of a ruthless, high-stakes war between creative freedom, financial survival, and political power on a global scale. And if you think Netflix is simply where you go to relax and watch a show, you might never look at that familiar red logo the same way again after today's story. In 1997, in a small office in California, Reed Hastings and Mark Randolph launched what seemed like a modest idea, an online DVD rental service. At the time, video rental stores like Blockbuster dominated the market, and the thought of mailing discs to customers felt risky, even foolish, to many in the industry. But Hastings had a vision. He saw the internet not just as a marketplace, but as a pipeline one that could deliver entertainment directly to people's homes without the inconvenience of late fees or limited stock. Netflix's early days were humble, offering a paper rental model before introducing a subscription service in 1999. That change, unlimited rentals for a flat monthly fee, would set the foundation for its explosive growth. By the early 2000s, Netflix was already gaining traction, capitalizing on customer frustration with Blockbuster's outdated business model. When Blockbuster had the chance to buy Netflix in 2000 for $50 million and famously laughed them out of the room, Hastings took it as fuel. Within a decade, Netflix would be the one laughing as Blockbuster collapsed into bankruptcy. But the real turning point came in 2007, when Netflix introduced streaming. Instead of waiting days for DVDs to arrive in the mail, customers could now watch movies instantly from their computers. It was a gamble. Broadband internet was still developing, and licensing content from studios was expensive. Yet it paid off. Subscribers surged, and Netflix began expanding globally, entering Canada in 2010, then Latin America, Europe, and beyond. To strengthen its hold on the market, Netflix made another bold move, producing its own content. In 2013, House of Cards premiered, marking Netflix's first original series. The political drama was a massive success, earning critical acclaim and proving that Netflix could compete not only as a distributor, but also as a creator. This was followed by hits like Orange is the New Black and Stranger Things series that became cultural phenomena and pulled millions more subscribers into the fold. By the mid-2010s, Netflix was no longer just a service. It was a global brand synonymous with entertainment. Its sleek interface, powerful recommendation algorithm, and binge-watching model kept viewers hooked. The company invested billions into content production, betting that exclusive shows and movies would keep subscribers loyal and fend off rising competition. But dominance came with a cost. Licensing fees, massive production budgets, and aggressive expansion pushed Netflix into heavy debt. Still, Wall Street was willing to overlook the red ink as long as subscriber numbers kept climbing. Netflix's leadership knew they were in a race to lock in as many users as possible before rivals could catch up. What the public didn't see, however, was the brewing storm behind the scenes. As Netflix pushed into new markets, it encountered cultural resistance, political restrictions, and criticism over its programming choices. The very strategies that had propelled it to the top would soon trigger some of the biggest scandals in its history. And those scandals were coming faster than anyone expected. As Netflix's subscriber base exploded, so did its ambitions. The company wasn't just licensing Hollywood blockbusters anymore, it was producing edgy original content designed to grab attention and spark conversation. But sometimes those conversations turned into firestorms. The most infamous example came in 2020 with the release of Cuties, a French coming-of-age film that Netflix promoted with a marketing poster many saw as overtly sexualizing children. What was meant to be a critique of societal pressures on young girls was drowned out by accusations of exploitation, leading to global outrage, political backlash in the United States, and even calls for criminal investigation. For Netflix, Cuties wasn't just a PR disaster. It became a symbol for critics who claimed the company had abandoned moral responsibility in the pursuit of shock value. This wasn't the first time Netflix found itself in hot water over content. In 2017, the streaming giant released 13 Reasons Why a Teen Drama Centered on Suicide. While it became a cultural phenomenon, mental health experts warned that the show's graphic depictions risked glamorizing suicide, potentially influencing vulnerable viewers. Studies later suggested a troubling correlation between the show's release and a rise in youth suicide rates. Though Netflix eventually added trigger warnings and toned down certain scenes, the damage to its reputation among parents and advocacy groups was done. Netflix also courted controversy internationally. In India, the release of A Suitable Boy in 2020 triggered outrage among conservative groups over a scene depicting an interfaith kiss in a temple, leading to police complaints and political pressure. In Brazil, the satirical film The First Temptation of Christ portrayed Jesus as gay, sparking protests, lawsuits, and even a Molotov cocktail attack on the studio that produced it. Netflix defended the film under the banner of artistic freedom, but the incident deepened its image as a lightning rod for cultural and religious conflict. Even its documentaries weren't safe from criticism. Tiger King, the sensational true crime hit of early 2020, was accused of exploiting its subjects and manipulating events for entertainment value. Meanwhile, investigative pieces like The Family and Turning Point 9/11 and The War on Terror were slammed by some viewers as biased or misleading, raising questions about Netflix's journalistic standards. Critics argued that Netflix had become addicted to outrage, deliberately pushing boundaries to keep subscribers talking, even at the cost of alienating certain audiences. Supporters countered that this was the price of creative freedom in a global marketplace, where what offends one culture might resonate with another. But regardless of where people stood, one fact was clear: Netflix's content choices were no longer just about entertainment. They were becoming political flashpoints, drawing in governments, activist groups, and furious social media campaigns. This put Netflix in an impossible position. On one hand, it needed bold, distinctive content to stand out in the increasingly crowded streaming market. On the other, every new scandal risked provoking boycotts, damaging its brand, and attracting regulatory scrutiny. The Cuties backlash was a wake-up call. For the first time, Netflix faced significant subscriber cancellations over a single piece of content, a sign that moral outrage could hit the company where it hurt most: its bottom line. Behind the scenes, executives wrestled with how to navigate this minefield. Should they play it safe and avoid politically or culturally sensitive topics, or should they double down, betting that controversy ultimately boosted visibility? In public, Netflix stuck to its defense of storytelling without borders, but internally, the debates grew heated. Each country had its own red lines, and a misstep in one market could trigger a global PR nightmare within hours. The stakes were rising fast, and Netflix's rapid global expansion meant these battles were multiplying. The very diversity of its audience, once its greatest strength, was becoming a challenge to manage. And as the company would soon discover, content scandals were only the first layer of a deeper, more dangerous problem: the political and legal pressures waiting just beyond the screen. By the time Netflix had firmly planted its flag in over 190 countries, it wasn't just a streaming service anymore. It was a global media power with the ability to influence culture, politics, and public opinion. But with that power came scrutiny, and governments around the world began pushing back when Netflix content clashed with their laws, values, or political narratives. The company soon learned that global expansion meant walking a tightrope between defending creative freedom and protecting market access. One of the most high-profile cases came in 2019 when Netflix removed an episode of Hassan Minhaj's Patriot Act in Saudi Arabia after government officials complained it violated the kingdom's cybercrime laws. The segment had criticized Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman over the murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Human rights organizations condemned Netflix for caving to authoritarian pressure, accusing it of putting profit ahead of principles. Netflix defended the decision as compliance with local law, but the optics were damaging. The streaming giant, known for championing free expression, appeared willing to compromise when faced with market access at stake. In Vietnam, a different kind of political friction emerged. In 2021, Netflix pulled multiple episodes of the Chinese drama Put Your Head on My Shoulder and the film Pine Gap after Vietnamese authorities claimed they contained inaccurate depictions of the country's maritime borders. The moves sparked debate over whether Netflix was becoming an enabler of state censorship or simply adapting to the realities of doing business in geopolitically sensitive regions. India proved to be an even more complex battlefield. With a rapidly growing subscriber base, it was a key market for Netflix's future, but also one of the most politically sensitive. Religious conservatives, political activists, and government agencies frequently targeted Netflix shows for allegedly offending religious sentiments, distorting history, or promoting anti-national content. In some cases, Netflix faced police complaints and calls for outright bans. Rather than risk losing access to India's vast market, Netflix often edited scenes, added disclaimers, or quietly removed controversial titles. The company's challenges didn't stop there. In Turkey, authorities pressured Netflix to cancel a series that included a gay character, reportedly threatening to revoke its operating license. Netflix complied, shelving the project before filming began. In Egypt and Jordan, the fantasy series Jinn drew outrage for kissing scenes and immoral behavior among teenage characters, leading to demands for tighter content regulation. In each case, Netflix's responses, whether by pulling content, altering it, or standing firm, fueled debates over where the line between cultural respect and censorship should be drawn. The pattern was clear. Netflix's global footprint was both its greatest asset and its most vulnerable point. Each new market came with unique laws, cultural expectations, and red lines. What played as bold and boundary-pushing in the United States could be seen as deeply offensive, even illegal elsewhere. And unlike traditional media companies, Netflix's instant streaming model meant that controversy in one country could spark political backlash in another within hours. Critics argued that Netflix was too quick to bend under pressure, trading its image as a champion of free expression for continued access to lucrative markets. Supporters countered that the company was navigating an impossible situation. No multinational could operate in nearly every country without making compromises. Yet every concession risked alienating audiences in other regions who saw such moves as hypocrisy. The stakes weren't just reputational. Political disputes could trigger costly delays, fines, or even outright bans, threatening Netflix's revenue streams and growth trajectory. The company began quietly building regional compliance teams, legal experts, and cultural advisors to anticipate and manage conflicts before they erupted. But as the political climate in many parts of the world grew more volatile, it became increasingly difficult to avoid flashpoints. What Netflix hadn't fully anticipated was that these political battles would soon intersect with another growing problem, the backlash from its own subscribers. As global scandals piled up and the company made controversial compromises, the trust it had built over decades began to erode, setting the stage for one of the most damaging waves of customer outrage in its history. For years, Netflix marketed itself as the friendly consumer-first disruptor of the entertainment industry. It was the company that promised no commercials, affordable prices, and most famously, the ability to share your account with friends and family without restrictions. In 2017, Netflix even posted a now infamous tweet, "Love is sharing a password." That simple line became part of its brand identity, reinforcing the idea that Netflix was on the viewer's side, not the corporate side. But in early 2023, that goodwill evaporated almost overnight. Facing slowing growth and mounting debt from massive content spending, Netflix announced it would begin cracking down on password sharing worldwide. What had once been a celebrated feature was now labeled unauthorized account use. Users would have to pay extra for additional households outside their primary address. For many longtime subscribers, it felt like a betrayal, a bait and switch after years of encouragement to share. Social media erupted with outrage memes mocking Netflix went viral, and the hashtag #JacCancelNetflix began trending in multiple countries. The backlash wasn't just about the policy change, it was about timing. The move came alongside a series of price hikes in major markets, with the US standard plan climbing from $11 in 2019 to $15.49 by 2022, and ad-free premium plans hitting $22. Netflix insisted the changes were necessary to fund its growing slate of content and to reinvest in quality programming. But customers questioned why they were paying more when some of the most beloved shows were being abruptly canceled after just a season or two. International markets saw their own flare-ups. In Latin America, where Netflix began testing the password-sharing crackdown, the company faced high cancellation rates and public calls to switch to cheaper competitors like Disney Plus or local services. In Canada and Spain, similar rollouts sparked customer drops, with some surveys showing up to a quarter of affected subscribers canceling outright. Even in countries where Netflix retained most customers, the shift in perception was stark. It was no longer the cool streaming platform. It was just another corporation squeezing its users. The optics worsened when Netflix rolled out an ad-supported tier in late 2022. For years, the company had mocked traditional television for interrupting content with commercials. Now faced with slowing revenue, it was adopting the very model it once ridiculed. While the ad-supported tier was cheaper, it signaled to many that Netflix was willing to compromise its core promise to maintain growth. The subscriber anger wasn't just about money, it was about trust. Netflix had built a relationship with viewers by positioning itself as a partner in entertainment, not an adversary. Every time a popular show was canceled due to low viewership, while billions were spent on risky new projects, it reinforced the feeling that the company's priorities had shifted from serving audiences to serving investors. This erosion of trust came at the worst possible time. The streaming market was no longer Netflix's playground. It was a battlefield. Disney Plus, HBO Max, Amazon Prime Video, Apple TV Plus, and dozens of regional platforms were fighting for the same viewers. In this environment, alienating loyal subscribers wasn't just risky, it was potentially fatal to Netflix's growth. Internally, executives insisted the changes were paying off. By mid-2023, The company reported a surge in new subscriptions in regions where password sharing restrictions were enforced, claiming it proved the policy was working. But the public narrative was harder to control. Every earnings report citing increased revenue came with a flood of online commentary about Netflix nickel and diming its customers. The damage wasn't limited to consumers. Investors grew wary, worried that Netflix's short-term gains from stricter policies could undermine long-term loyalty. Analysts warned that while competitors were adding subscribers through lower prices and content bundling, Netflix risked pricing itself out of households already burdened by subscription fatigue. What Netflix was beginning to realize was that this wasn't just a customer satisfaction issue, it was a brand identity crisis. The company that had once been the underdog champion of viewers now looked in the eyes of many like the very industry giant it had once sought to replace. And as trust eroded, so did its immunity to another growing threat, the brutal financial and competitive pressures that were already closing in. By the mid-2020s, Netflix's biggest problem wasn't just scandal or subscriber outrage, it was survival in an industry it had once dominated without challenge. For years, Netflix had operated on a growth-at-all-costs model, pouring billions into content production licensing and global expansion. In 2021 alone, it reportedly spent over $17 billion on programming, a figure that stunned even Wall Street. The bet was simple: flood the platform with enough original and exclusive content to keep subscribers hooked and competitors at bay. But the cost of that strategy was a mountain of debt. By 2023, Netflix's long-term debt had ballooned past $14 billion, and with rising interest rates, servicing that debt was becoming more expensive by the quarter. At the same time, the streaming market had transformed into a brutal battlefield. Disney+, which launched in 2019, was adding tens of millions of subscribers annually, powered by its library of Marvel, Star Wars, and Pixar titles. HBO Max, with its deep catalog of prestige programming, and Amazon Prime Video, with the backing of one of the richest companies in the world, were fighting aggressively for market share. Even Apple TV Plus, once underestimated, was winning critical acclaim and high-profile awards. The age of Netflix as the only streaming game in town was over. The competition wasn't just about content, it was about bundling pricing and ecosystems. Disney could package Disney Plus Hulu and ESPN Plus at a discounted rate. Amazon could tie Prime Video to its e-commerce empire. Apple could integrate Apple TV Plus seamlessly with its hardware. Netflix, in contrast, had only one product streaming. Without a broader ecosystem, it was more vulnerable to subscription fatigue. The point at which consumers simply canceled services to cut costs, financial analysts began asking uncomfortable questions. How long could Netflix sustain billion-dollar content budgets without collapsing under its own weight? Would it have to slow down production, risking the loss of subscribers? The company's quarterly earnings calls became more tense as executives tried to reassure investors that growth was still possible, despite rising churn and slowing new signups. Behind closed doors, there were whispers about whether Netflix's success story might end the way so many tech giants did, not with a dramatic collapse, but with a slow decline into irrelevance. Industry insiders speculated about potential mergers, acquisitions, or even the sale of Netflix to a larger media conglomerate. While Netflix publicly dismissed such ideas, the fact that they were being discussed at all was a sign of how much the company's image had shifted from invincible innovator to vulnerable incumbent. To counter the financial strain, Netflix doubled down on international markets, investing heavily in local language content like Squid Game from South Korea, Money Heist from Spain, and Lupin from France. These gambles often paid off, delivering global hits at a fraction of the cost of Hollywood blockbusters. But relying on lightning-in-a-bottle successes wasn't a sustainable strategy. For every Squid Game, there were dozens of expensive projects that failed to find an audience. Then came the whispers about Netflix's accounting practices. Critics accused the company of using aggressive amortization schedules to make its massive spending on content appear less damaging in the short term. While not illegal, the tactic raised eyebrows among financial watchdogs and investors who worried that the company's balance sheet painted a rosier picture than reality. In a market already jittery about tech valuations, perception was everything, and Netflix could not afford to look weak. All of this was happening while subscriber trust was already fraying due to price hikes, cancellations of beloved shows, and the crackdown on password sharing. Competitors saw an opening launching aggressive promotions to lure away disillusioned Netflix users. The once unthinkable idea of Netflix losing its #1 spot in streaming was now a very real possibility. Netflix found itself in a paradox. To survive the streaming wars, it needed to spend more than ever on fresh, addictive content. But the more it spent, the deeper it sank into financial quicksand. And with Wall Street's patience wearing thin, one bad quarter could set off a chain reaction of investor panic, subscriber losses, and cost-cutting measures that might permanently damage the brand. The stage was set for a showdown, not just with Disney Plus, Amazon, or HBO Max, but with the company's own past decisions. And as Netflix braced for the battles ahead, one question loomed over everything. Could the streaming giant reinvent itself again, or was it already on the slow, irreversible slide toward the fate it once mocked, becoming the next blockbuster? From its humble start, mailing DVDs, to becoming the most influential streaming platform on the planet, Netflix has been a story of bold vision, relentless risk-taking, and cultural dominance. But along the way, the very traits that fueled its rise — fearless content choices, aggressive global expansion, and a willingness to disrupt — also planted the seeds of its most dangerous challenges. The scandals over controversial programming, the accusations of bowing to political pressure, the backlash from betrayed subscribers, and the crushing weight of financial competition have all chipped away at the image of the untouchable streaming king. Today, Netflix is no longer just battling for subscribers, it's battling for trust. In a market flooded with rivals and shaped by rapidly changing viewer habits, the company's next moves could determine whether it remains the leader of the streaming wars or becomes another cautionary tale in the history of entertainment. Reinvention is in its DNA. After all, it's already transformed itself more than once. But this time, the stakes are higher. The audience is more skeptical, and the margin for error is razor thin. Perhaps that's the real drama of Netflix's story. It's no longer just about the shows we watch, but about whether the platform itself can survive. The plot twists it helped create. As competitors close in and public patience runs out, the question isn't whether Netflix can make the next Stranger Things or Squid Game. It's whether it can hold on to the world's attention long enough to write the next chapter of its own survival. Because in the end, the biggest cliffhanger in Netflix history might not be on your screen. It might be Netflix itself.